Hey everybody, my name is Marco. I am a retired professional opera singer, and I love talking about video game music from an emotional perspective and highlighting the important aspects of music and story and how they connect and coalesce.
Hello everybody, I am Island XD. I go by Island most of the time. I am a YouTuber that focuses on gacha games a lot of the times, but specifically lore and story in gacha games. I love playing through them, I stream them, and I make videos about them. And right now, one of my favorite games is Reverse 1999.
Well, everybody, I am so excited because today Island and I are getting together to talk about this very exciting new addition to Reverse 1999 featuring opera of all things, and of course, all things complicated and fascinating and wonderful lore that is the lore of Reverse 1999.
This is
Island,
best of both worlds.
It's the best of both worlds.
Opera.
What was your thought process while playing this? Because I certainly was kind of excited because obviously it's fictionalized, but the use of accurate depictions of operatic scenery, music, which is directly pulled from. I mean, of course, the chapter is called E lucevano le stelle, which means, and the stars shone. That's from Act 3 of Tosca. And there are many parallels to Tosca here. I was curious what your perspective was on experiencing the operatic moments. Did you know about opera before watching this chapter?
Yo, I'm going to be honest with you. I had no idea what any of this was. And the words were also so foreign to me. Some of the songs, I think I've heard them before for sure.
Yeah.
But like the whole operatic singing portion, I didn't think they would go that far. And they had it. I thought it was great in the actual gameplay, like one of the cutscenes and stuff, several cutscenes. But in general, I had no idea what to expect. It's great because you're here and you can kind of teach me some stuff. And then at the same time, I can like maybe piggyback on like, oh, that makes more sense with the lore because this is what they were trying to portray. And this is something Reverse 1999 does all the time with most of their events, if not all of them. They mirror something from real life and they try to like make it match in some way to make it more entertaining and enjoyable for the players. And this is a main story. So there's some stuff in here that is very heavily, pretty deep in terms of the lore, foreshadowing the future stuff that we don't know yet. Regardless of all that, I thought it was pretty cool. The opera, I wasn't used to it. I always enjoy classical music and operatic music, but never really like studied it. So I think it was a good experience for me, yeah. How did you feel?
I felt really represented. I think it's really hard to represent opera in a genuine, authentic way that both educates people, but also is like a little bit of these references that if you're unaware of them, you won't catch them. But if you're aware of them, you're like, oh my goodness, that I can't believe that they, like I was looking at the, this character that is so evidently like the main focus of this. Isolde is obviously named off of Tristan und Isolde. Tristan und Isolde is an opera by Richard Wagner. Her attacks, she sings a tenor aria from Die Valkyrie, Winterstürme wischen den Wondermond, which is a tenor aria, but she sings it. She sings some stuff from Carmen, Du bist der Lenz, which is another aria. So I thought it was really interesting. Also, her ultimate is, I think if I recall correctly, she says, Ti soffoca il sangue, which is literally what Tosca says as she stabs Scarpia in Act 2, which is a huge moment. And of course, we obviously are seeing that in this particular, in the opera within the opera. So from a lore perspective, I have a question for you. Now, Isolde mentions near the back half of this that Isolde has this like arcanist ability, or she is like in touch with magic, and artists are more prone to being magically imbued or boosted, if you will. What's the lore there?
Basically, what happens here is throughout the entire game, and even this chapter particularly, a lot is piggybacking on the concept of humans and arcanists. And to elaborate on that more in terms of Isolde, she obviously has arcane ability, but her arcane ability allows her to basically allow herself to get possessed by ghosts, who then while possessing her body, is able to sing. This is literally throughout her entire family too. Her mother, who passed away, also had this kind of a power. Her brother, who, spoiler alert, is dead, had the same power of being an artist as a painter. So like this is kind of like their family hereditary arcane power. Now what ends up happening is, even though there are artists that are not arcanists in this world, because you have this arcane power, they pretty much get like a super buff, right? They get super buff and become this super celebrity. And while people might put them on a pedestal and be like, you're great, that's an amazing form of art, also there are prejudice against that. Like a stigmata against arcanists is like, they're not even real, right? They're fake their powers are not themselves, it's not their talent or something that they worked on. So there's that kind of a conflict even within herself. So that kind of drives the conflict of her identity, right? And then she kind of has this mental instability. She feels like she's not good enough. She is very insecure at times, and she has a very fragile mental, basically. That's the gist of it. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of that got missed in the storytelling, even though it is very prominent part of the actual lore in this chapter. It is something that's very prevalent throughout the entire game story, and the arcanist versus human, the prejudice is very important in my opinion. And that I thought was like the really core part of this particular chapter, especially with Solde. And this also happens with other characters, like Marcus is one of the characters in here as well, who also has that arcanist ability, but then her mentor, Hoffman, in the same event or chapter, is actually a human. But they are able to work together, and because, you know, they have like the same idea, same goals. On the flip side, for Isolde, it's kind of the opposite. The people, they revere her, but they also kind of point fingers at her. So it's like a weird dynamic.
There are so many interesting operatic references, even in the description that you described, because
Really?
Comte d'Hoffmann is an opera by Jacques Offenbach, so a French composer. So that's one reference. Then what you just said about being revered, but then also feared, that's the premise of Carlisle Floyd's Susanna, which is a biblical story in a modern time where Susanna is revered and lauded for her beauty, but then has a lot of bad things happen to her, and in the public opinion, even though they are attracted to her, there's also a lot of shame there, and she's looked down upon, and it's a very tragic story. You know, one of the things that was really striking to me, and there were a couple key moments of this that I found really, really compelling, especially unironically, the beginning and the end. The first moment that we see Isolde, we see her strapped in this sort of medical device, essentially, in a lecture hall. And she's almost like being used as a sort of study piece, which I found, was essentially torture for the sake of education, it felt like. And it was really, really haunting to me, because the artists that I've come to know, and myself included, we've struggled with our own fair share of mental health and navigating what it's like to be an artist, and the self-doubt, insecurity, and all the things that exist within this world. And I find it very interesting that these are touched on. Obviously, they're not necessarily the cornerstones, but it was certainly very relatable, which I found I didn't expect from Reverse 1999. And then, of course, at the end, there are parallels there to actually what's happening on stage. And like we started this conversation, I found it really interesting. And this happens in opera as well. There's an opera called I Pagliacci by Leoncavallo, called The Clowns, where there is a play within the opera. Essentially, this theater troupe comes in, they present a performance, and within that performance, they're also singing as different characters. So it's very interesting, because then at the end of this, we have Isolde committing murder, and that's exactly what happens in the context of Tosca when she stabs and kills Baron Scarpia, because he tries to seduce her and threatens to kill Mario Cavaradossi. I found those dynamics, those moments, story-wise, to be so compelling and so interesting, because they touched on and developed on things that were based on reality, which was really, really cool. Was there anything that stuck out to you lore-wise, or I guess like any plot points that really kind of caught you off guard?
I do want to ask you a question. In this game, there are two entities, basically. There's more, but there's mainly Manus Vindictae and the Foundation, right? And obviously, our main character, Vertin, is with the Foundation at the current moment. And then in this event, we have Isolde eventually on the way to joining Manus Vindictae before the end of this chapter. My question is, which entity, you don't have to know lore to answer this question, I just want your opinion. Which entity, Manus or Foundation, do you think is actually doing the right thing? Or does it just doesn't exist? The right thing just doesn't exist.
I mean, based on my experience and understanding of Reverse 1999 story, it's very hard to say which one of those is the proper and more like morally appropriate entity, because they're both not exactly great. There's like an idealism in the Manus Vindictae, so even though they are, I think, perceived as the enemy per se, I like their idealism and their desire to want to go to a time that is different than where we are now. But then on the flip side, the Foundation is using and manipulating children and turning them into vessels. That's a tough question. I don't think I can answer because they're both not great.
Right. Okay. Okay. To follow up on this, the reason why I asked is because every chapter, especially this chapter, when you look at the story of Isolde and Kakanya, because they're very close in this chapter, right? At some points in this chapter, you would kind of want to root for Kakanya in a way. She's doing the right thing. She has like the ethics of morality and all that stuff down, grounded. But then she also falters at the end. Isolde, on the other hand, you would like, oh, she's kind of going crazy. But then there's some parts in it that you're like, yeah, if that was me, I don't know what to do. Like, that's crazy, right? This entire chapter, as well as other chapters in the past, are very heavy on conflict that likes to stir up a lot of tragedy, a lot of sadness, a lot of emotional struggle, even for a player. And, we obviously see the characters going through emotional struggle, but as a player looking into it, I'm like, oh my goodness, this story's good, but it's kind of rough. I just wanted to see how you felt about the whole idea of like tragedy and how that particularly could like mix in with the opera idea of it, because I know in opera there's a lot of, what do you think, a tragic ending, tragic tales?
Yeah, there's lots of tragic endings in opera. In fact, you mentioned something about Isolde going crazy and kind of losing herself a little bit, and there was a particular moment that I can't recall off the top of my head, where essentially we have what I would call a mad scene. And a mad scene is something that exists in multiple different operas, usually in this period called the Bel Canto period with Bellini, Donizetti, and Rossini. And Lucia di Lammermoor is a prime example. And a lot of the sort of coloration of the images in this particular chapter also led me down this path. Essentially, Lucia sees the ghost of her beloved, or the ghost of like her ancestors, and like thinks that it's hard to explain, but essentially she like talks about a fountain of blood, and like the water turns to blood and all sort of stuff. At the end, she is forced to marry somebody, and in a fit of sadness, she actually murders Arturo, this character, and comes out in her wedding gown covered in blood. Not dissimilar to the things that we see in an opera like Salome, which is another thing that Isolde is sort of based off of. And there's this mad scene where for 15 minutes she just perpetually gets worse and worse and worse, and just ranting, screaming, high notes left and right, and then eventually she collapses and dies. So there were a couple moments where I was like, wow, Isolde is actually kind of in line with a little bit of the extremes that we see a lot of our heroines in opera. And yes, absolutely. I mean, this I would say that this chapter was especially operatic in terms of its like heft. In some ways, I actually think that this is more compelling than opera, because sometimes opera stories are a little lame. But a lot of people end up leaving and crying because, there's an intensity. And Salome is a prime example of that. Sort of like raw, kissing the head of your dead lover. It's pretty messed up. And that one's by Richard Strauss, which it's much more very uncomfortable to watch.
There was one point in the story where Isolde, because of Kakanya, because she wanted Kakanya to be on her side, she's like, hey, if it makes you feel better, let me go just kill Heinrich. And then I was like, is that really that simple? She poof teleports, and like she just like, hey, I'm here to kill you, bam. I'm like, that progressed so fast, and it kind of reminded me of maybe some things that actually could happen in an opera, where it's just like snap, and then
the
like
plot shifts. Yes, it happens all the time.
I thought that was fascinating. I was like, whoa, okay, that happened, and it just
there were a lot of things in this that I mentioned, feeling very seen, and being, as a classical music lover, to really feel connected to, like even the fact that the character's name is Heinrich. I thought of Heinrich Heine, which was a very popular poet that had a lot of music set with art song. He references Mr. Scarpia. There's a conversation with a Mr. Angelotti, and the Angelotti is the character from Tosca who escapes prison, that he's imprisoned by Baron Scarpia in the opera Tosca. He flees prison. He meets Mario Cavaradossi. He's the reason the whole plot happens. So I was like, oh, look, the whole gang is here. And I found that to be very interesting.
Angelotti, I think Angelotti is what Heinrich was referring to Marcus in the story, if I remember correctly. And that's actually a really interesting point you bring it up, because Marcus is the driving point of this entire story. Like, secretly. Okay, there was this one point in the story which was super fascinating because you know how we touch up on like the Arcanist and the humans kind of thing going on, and then there's a storm. Basically, this is an era where the people of the Foundation, their whole job is to just observe, right? They're just there to observe. And basically, Marcus's job with Hoffman in this chapter is that they're just here to observe what's going on and try to figure out some hints as to what makes Madness, gives them the ability to like survive the storm, essentially. The craziest thing is, Marcus, basically, if we're making parallels to Angelotti, you would think in the beginning she's supposed to be like an observer, right? A bystander. But funnily, at the end, she's the one that like starts driving the story in a way where like she pushes Kakanya to make decisions. She can read the situation and like people's personalities with her arcane skills like an observer, which is interesting. But at the end, she also does take action to push the narrative and the story. And I thought that was pretty cool in terms of Angelotti, how it's like such a main character in driving the story. I thought it was pretty fascinating. I don't know. Yeah. I thought that was really cool.
Well, it was interesting to me because Marcus does feel like a secondary cast member, even though Marcus is like a primal and vitally important part of the plot. And I find that's something that we get a lot in opera, where there will be characters in the background or like someone will be referenced or spoken to, and they're not even on stage, and yet they are the one that's driving the plot forward. If Angelotti in Tosca hadn't gone to the church and Mario Cavaradossi was there and met with Angelotti, if they hadn't met, the plot would not have happened in the story. Everything happens because of Angelotti. And if Angelotti and Marcus are synonymous, then I wonder if that was not intentional by the narrative team to create a sort of parallel because of how much Tosca is the opera is referenced in this, especially calling it E Lucevan le Stelle. I mean, what a fascinating thing to do. We get this a lot in games where we will take something old and remix it into a new song, right? Or take a song from 1800s, and so to do that, but with like a whole story arc, a 4 or 5 hour story arc, is actually extremely impressive. And we're not even talking about like the different costumes and the different characters. You get some Papageno references to Magic Flute with some of the character design. You get Der Rosenkavalier by Richard Strauss with some costumes. There's one more. Suor Angelica is another one for another.
All the new costumes that they're releasing.
All the new costumes, and those are beautiful to me because these are again parallels to opera that are they're such specific examples that you wouldn't even consider them to be even remotely actual. Like, what is it? What is Suor Angelica? Well, Suor Angelica is an opera by Giacomo Puccini. What's the Happy Birdcatcher? Well, that's Papageno from Die Zauberflöte by Mozart. Like you wouldn't think those things. And I really respect that they really leaned into the sort of operatic elements of this story and produced something that was both A, meaningful, and B, not just like it wasn't trite, it was actually like elevated the story and took it one step further, which I thought was really, really brilliant, honestly.
I think in general, I'm just so surprised because there's a lot of elements in this chapter that piggybacks on the things that they already planned in the previous chapter, like in terms of lore and story. But then to bring in like this entire element of opera and try to mix it together while still coming out the other end with like, okay, the story, it's progressing. Like the concept with the Madness and the Foundation, they're still progressing well. Right. All the characters are getting their character, what do you call it? Character arcs, development, character development. With the addition of, I don't know how they do it.
It's such a good point, because it's like anything that we've seen before had nothing to do with any sort of, I mean, there are always references to periods, of course. And like, obviously this one, there's a Vienna element, of course, and whatever, but I find it really odd that somehow someone sat down and was like, you know what, for chapter 6, we should somehow connect 4 or 5 other chapters that are nothing related to like music besides the characters that we've already seen, and let's make let's connect them directly to an opera. I don't know why they thought that. Someone must be a big opera fan at
maybe, because like they done similar things in the events, but not the main story.
Right.
I think chapter 5 was there's a smidgen of like the Aegean Sea. I think it's in Europe, that area of the sea, and like I was like, that was cool reference, and like the whole math thing, that was cool reference. But like chapter 6 is like the whole package of opera just like jammed in there. And I'm like, okay, is this how they're gonna do the main story from now on? Because oh my god, it was very, very shocking. It was very surprising. I enjoyed it really a lot.
It was the first time that I've sort of come back to Reverse 1999 since about I finished up chapter 3. So I had two chapters there where I hadn't played, and to see the level of respect and desire to tell a compelling story through real world mediums in a way that didn't trivialize them but also made them seem very important was really special, because it was fun to get a narrative and a drama told over the backdrop of another drama.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And you make a good point. Like, I wish that we could sit down with somebody and be like, how, why, who among you loves opera enough to create this? Like, because again, these references are so particular and so specific that I feel like most everybody that hasn't spent at least 2 to 5 years, or in my case, 10.
They have to be a fan, right? They can't just like say we're gonna do opera and then go research for like 6 months and like come back. You know what I mean?
Not with these characters. Suor Angelica is not that popular. Magic Flute, sure. Mozart, Marriage of Figaro, sure. But like Der Rosenkavalier is not. It's not one of the most top performed operas, even though it's exceptionally good. Like the broad range of you got references to Strauss, you got references to Mozart, you got references to Puccini, you've got references to Wagner, you have references to Carmen Bizet, you have references obviously to Tosca, which is also Puccini. Like, that's nuts. And I do think that deserves to be commended and appreciated, because it's not. It sounds weird to say, but it's not normal.
Yeah,
It's not something you experience.
Yeah.
Other games have attempted it, but I think that this is actually probably one of the more successful versions of it.
I love this game, bro. I love this game, bro.
You know what? Every time I log in, I do get this like warm, comfortable feeling, you know, and it's just nice. It's just like a really good game. I find it very peaceful, and I love the card mechanic.
It feels cozy, but then when you play the story, they just destroy your emotions. Yo, I was playing at the end of this chapter. I was like playing pretty, I was chill. I was just following along. At the end, that last scene with Kakanya and Isolde, where Kakanya, spoiler alert, Kakanya hypnotizes her to try to get answers out of her. But she despises hypnotism as a form of getting information or like getting people to open up. Isolde knows that she hates hypnotism, but understands that she's using it because the situation is too far gone and she's just depressed. But then instead of getting upset, at the very end, Isolde goes, if this is what you want, I'll accept it. And then that's how it ends. And I'm like, how many feelings did I go through right now in this last 5 minutes? It's like, there's a bit of sadness, depression, anger, frustration. And like, how do you encapsulate all that in like, I don't know, a chapter? That's kind of crazy to me. I don't watch a lot of operas, but maybe I'll be interested in it now, because if this is similar in that way, where like so many different feelings are brought out of you from just like witnessing an opera, maybe it'll be something I'll enjoy in the future for sure.
I do hope that people will be, curious about some of these operatic references, or like, wow, I saw Tosca from Reverse 1999. What is Tosca? And then go to YouTube and look up the Tosca in their native language subtitles and watch it, or find an opportunity to go. And there are standing room tickets. There are tickets that are not unaffordable, and in the States certainly it runs the gamut. But if you were to go to the Metropolitan Opera, you can get a ticket for $25. There's a lot of misconceptions about how expensive it is, but there's truly good stuff out there. And while these pieces are hundreds and hundreds of years old at this point, it's clear to me that there's still a relevant and interesting way to incorporate them in modern media that is being consumed on phones, on tablets, on computers, and can be digested in a way that flips the script and makes it interesting, and hopefully then also expands it to the real deal. So I'm glad to hear that. If you or anybody watching this has recommendations, you know where to leave a comment, and I will gladly provide.
How long do these operas usually? Is there an average time, or is it just random?
No, most operas are 2.5 hours.
Okay, so it's like watch long movie.
Before. Yeah, it's like watching a long movie or literally playing the chapter 6 of Reverse 1999.
Yeah,
If you can do that in one sitting, you can sit and watch an opera for the same amount of time. I'll tell you that much.
I got you. Final thoughts on what you thought about just, if not the event or the chapter, but the game in general. I guess we touched on most of it, but like any just final things you want to add on?
I'm just glad that this game is going well and going strongly, and it doesn't have any real signs of stopping. It's been really interesting to see its evolution. And a lot of things, when you start, there's like a little bit of hype that is around it, and then things ebb and flow. But it's nice to see that like it seems to have found its audience, its core base, and it's nice that they're willing to risk the biscuit and do something like this, because this is a risky move. And my hope is like I said, that people will be tuned into this, appreciate it, and also want to explore the source material even more. So I'm very grateful that this game exists, and shoot, it's back on my iPad.
Let's go. Let's go.
What about you?
Man, every time I play any event or any chapter of this game, I obviously notice these references are from real life. There are several events that I absolutely really enjoyed prior to this as well, like the Remake Cup. I had no idea what the Remake Cup was even about until I played this game, and I'm like, this sounds interesting. So I Googled it, I started researching it, and I'm like, I'm making a video out of this. You know what I mean? So every time I play this game, they have some references that I don't know what they are, and eventually I learn it through the game that I enjoy playing, which I think is like a phenomenal thing. It's very powerful, actually, because you can teach people so many stuff through the things that they enjoy. And I think that's just the most fascinating thing about this game that I rarely get from a lot of games. I absolutely love it for what it offers for me particularly, and like every character has like their lore. Like we have a Sputnik. You know what I mean? Like that whole like history. I mean, we got so many things. Now I'm invested in like Verton and their whole story, their fantastical fictional story. So now I'm invested in that. And I still haven't, weird flex, I still haven't missed a single day of login since the release of the game.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
The day that breaks, I'll be so mad. I swear. But yeah, it's been amazing. I just hope more people play the game. If you guys haven't already playing the game, great. I'm so happy that you guys are enjoying it. If you haven't, maybe you stopped. This is a awesome time because this chapter was fantastic. By the way, this video is sponsored. But I'm just saying, even if this wasn't sponsored, just, please play the game. You don't understand. This game is actually good. And if you don't like the combat, it is what it is, but just play the game. Just try it. Just the story.
When I had seen something about Opera coming up, and I've actually kept my eye on Reverse 1999, and I was like, okay, I know this is coming. I'm waiting for the day that it does. And then when we got, the call to come work together, I was like, ooh, it's time. Yeah. I've been actually literally like excited about it since I saw the sort of like, I think because it was out on Chinese servers a little bit earlier. So the fact that it's like here and I got to experience it, I'm like, yeah, this is really cool.
Sweet.
So it's awesome. And yeah, thanks everybody for watching this, and I hope that you learned something interesting and new. And Island, thanks for helping me keep up with the lore.
Thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video.
They're gonna skip anyway.
All right.